Hi, this is Mehdi.
Hey, this is Fran.
This is Total Tactics Football. We had a crazy game tonight. Man City beat Real Madrid 2-1, and they progressed to the quarterfinals. Fran, how are you feeling?
Quite depressed, really. As you all know, I'm a Real Madrid fan, but it comes down to the fact that City were the better team over two legs, and they fully deserve to go on in the tie. And good luck to them.
I agree. I mean, I feel they set up as they did in the first leg.
Mhm.
We saw that they pressed from the front. We know Pep doesn't like to change his philosophy. They're going to come out and play. And Real Madrid were hoping that they could counter, but today, two individual errors from Rafael Varane were enough for Man City to go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it was exactly what you said with the press. He installing Gabriel Jesus in the left really makes sure that Carvajal is cut off, and Carvajal is one of our more composed defenders. And one of the issues of playing Militao and Varane is the lack of. I mean, both of them are first of all right-footed. So when you see Real Madrid pass out of the back, the issue that they have is that they aren't able to turn their body to the left and spread the field. So basically they are effectively just passing in between Militao, Varane, and Courtois. And that shuts off one flank, and the work rate of Gabriel Jesus cuts off Carvajal and also presses all the way to Varane, who's not necessarily super composed with the ball. When you see him play with Ramos, usually he is the one who is more passive, and Ramos is usually the person who is allowed to soak up the pressure because he has the composure to do a crossfield ball, or he has the composure at least to switch his body up and move to the left flank and pass the ball to Mondi. And however, you could not see that today. Militao's back effectively was to Mondi, and therefore Varane was taking in a lot of pressure, and he made a huge mistake in the first goal.
I agree with you, and I think that missing Ramos, as everyone's mentioned, is a big deal. I know he's composed and he soaks up the pressure, but at the same time, when people make mistakes, he's also the leader there who lifts the team. He'll get the team going regardless of mistakes, and that's something today maybe was a bit missing when even Varane made a mistake and he played really well after that, but then another one came, and that's just you need someone there to be able to give you some sort of um, composure to relax you a little bit, and that's what Ramos brings to the side, and they were heavily missing that today.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. It's obviously a game that comes down to the two mistakes of Iran because they were effectively the two goals that Man City scored. But ultimately, I think over the 90 minutes, City had a lot of pressure, and Real Madrid were really giving a lot of space to Kevin De Bruyne as a result. And I think that's not necessarily a poor tactical performance from Zidane, but really one where you can see in this sort of setup with Varane Militao, it's not good enough to defend versus a team that presses so well as Man City. And truth be told, no Spanish team really presses as well as Man City or Liverpool do.
I agree with you. Moving on to Kevin De Bruyne, like the best midfielder in the world. I think arguably, I don't think there are many competitors he has in that position. He had a phenomenal game today. He was everywhere. You could see that Casemiro was trying to mock him, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just I'll let you explain a bit more on the phenomenon that is Kevin De Bruyne.
Yeah, I mean, he's a magical player. You can really see him in pretty much all elements of the pitch. He has the ability to roam freely in Pep's system. But another key thing about him is he's a box-to-box player. He also presses magnificently hard, and that makes him such a hard player to deal with. He's great in tight spaces, but at the same time, has that sort of physicality and pressure 90 minutes at a time. And it's too much for a side like Real Madrid to deal with when they're unable to actually pass out of the back because you're just giving too many chances, frankly, to KDB.
I agreed. I mean, for me, I personally feel that Zidane's setup was right. He put up the best team that he could.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a little bit with him that he doesn't sometimes make the right subs or the subs at the right time. We saw Hazard was on the pitch. He's coming back from injury. This is not to knock him down or anything, but he wasn't the same player that we know. He wasn't taking on chances. He was playing a bit too safe, which is fine. But considering that you're chasing a game and you also went down, I felt like a player like Vinicius would have been appropriate for that kind of game. He brings the X factor, the guy who likes to grab the game and run at players. We didn't see him, and instead we saw Jovic. What do you think about that, friend?
I mean, I think the subs were all over the place, and the tactical game plan in the second half was poor. I think when you look at the first half, it was 1-1. It was actually quite a good half for Real Madrid after the first 15 minutes where they struggled to play out of the back. You know, Benzema really had three chances to score in the first, and that's a credit to the fact that our players are able to conjure those kind of key moments, right? But in the
Yeah,
second half, they continued to be overrun because simply players like Hazard weren't able to get on the ball and make a decisive move. And the issue is, you know, we've always mentioned that when Hazard and Benzema play together, because Hazard is no longer looking to kind of take on his defenders, then he actually crowds the same sort of space in the field as Benzema. And you saw even
yeah,
Benzema, he even tried to drift in from the left and he was able to do that.
yeah.
Why Hazard couldn't do that, I'm not really sure. I think you have to just say this season was a blank. It was a dud. You have to give him, I think, the benefit of the doubt and say next season you have to perform. And this season is a wash. When it comes down to it, I think the Asensio substitution was very strange. I think Rodrygo was still looking good in the match, and he had already showed that he was able to create, right? And a couple times at
Yeah.
least you can see him still dribbling through Cancelo and at least trying to make a move down the right. And I think that Asensio injury substitution realistically should have been the opposite. It should have been something like Vinicius, maybe at 65 minutes for Hazard, and you at least
Yeah.
provide a different sort of dynamic onto the field. And at the same time, you also have Isco, you have Valverde. That's another formation that I think Real Madrid play very well with. Real Madrid never plays with the 4-4-2, and they never play with Jovic, frankly. So
Yeah.
why you'd go to that and why you'd only make those substitutions at 83 minutes is a bit bewildering because Zidane has always been poor with substitutions, but this post-lockdown and especially in the break where they kind of had that 10-game run streak, I saw him use substitutions plenty, and you have five substitutions, so you know that's something you have to look at. And it seemed like he was honestly stunned today.
I think it might just been, and I think those the defensive errors just caught him out.
Mm-hmm.
And just to touch on that Hazard thing just a little bit, I feel with players who have niggling injuries, we heard before the game that he might have been missed as well for this game. There were doubts, or then he joined the squad. I think that it's an ankle injury as well, which considering with the style of play that he has means that there's a lot of stress on that ankle, and you will have players who go in hard, and the opposition knows that he is, he's coming back from injury. They like to challenge the player. They want to put in a hard tackle, make it difficult for the other one. And you could see that mentally, he just wasn't ready to put in 100% in his dribbles or his commitment going forward. And that's down. It'll take time until his legs heal, his ankles heal, and hopefully next season we can see a better Hazard. It's a delight to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and lastly, just before we were talking about Real Madrid and their squad depth. We see that they are trying to move on a lot of players this summer. Um, what do you think is going on in the behind the scenes, and is it the right decision? I mean, this is an aging squad that we can say. What do you think, Fran?
Look, I've got to be completely honest. I actually think that the club feels that because we did so well in the league, that we're completely fine with going with this starting 11 and moving on to the next season. And one thing I will say is obviously Ramos was a big miss today, so you have to take that into context. But it's more the fact that, this group of players were good enough, I think, the Spanish league that has somewhat dropped at the top level. I think Barcelona has gotten worse, and Atleti this year was almost a restructuring year for them, where they've lost a few key players, namely Griezmann, and they've tried to reincorporate their team, and it took them a while for them to actually pick up results given the fact that they started the season so poorly. And that was kind of us last year. But if the rumors are to be true, selling players like Reguilon and Hakimi obviously being sold, it does tell you that Real Madrid don't have much depth in the future from those kind of midfield positions, and also defensively. So you still have the bulk of an aging squad, and I think this might be a game that tells you, to compete with really those elite sides like City that have depth top to bottom, apart from their defense,
Yeah.
if we're being realistic, that
Yeah.
Real Madrid needs to dip into the transfer market instead of continue to sell.
I agree with you. I think that there are just they have some solutions for that squad in their loaned out players. So I mean, they might not even have to dabble in the market too much.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, considering this is a Maya's market as well, they could possibly, even with the sales that they're making, they could possibly make a few good acquisitions. And I personally think, this is my opinion, I feel after this tonight's game, Perez and Zidane will have a conversation, and they will be discussing, seeing that maybe considering next season the players are getting a bit older, they might actually make they might change their plan a little bit.